If everyone would silence their phones and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone, to our July 22nd of 2019 Select Board meeting. First item of business that we have is a public hearing on the issuance of a building permit at 21 Car Drive, a private road.
28.
I'm sorry, what number?
28.
Oh, okay, on our report, 28 Car Road. Any comment in reference to the request for the building permit? That was quick. Talk about letting the vice chair off the hook quickly. I love that.
Good try. Go ahead.
Any questions, comments, concerns from board
I've
members?
just had a chance to review it, and I don't see any comments that need to be made on it.
Okay.
I don't have any.
I didn't see any either.
Okay.
I think he's established himself as a resident by now.
You think so? So the only thing I would ask is that all of the documents change from 21 to 28 Car Drive. Is that correct?
That's where the lot is.
I apologize, accept full responsibility.
Yeah, it's right on the top of the actual request form, so very good.
The application shows 31, Madam Chair.
That's my home address, but the lot in question is 28.
Yep, location of construction is correct on the actual application.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're fine. So would anyone like to make a motion in reference to that?
So moved.
Second it,
We have a second, okay? And all...
Air aye.
Bailey, aye.
Hatch eye.
Hardikoff, aye.
Nap aye, because I know I've already reviewed it.
Very good. Want to jump into 2B?
Sure. Public hearing for the issuance of a building permit at 144
I'm sorry.
Longshore Drive.
Hold on one second. You've got, is this in reference to the board's vote on the...
Yes, when you take a vote and there are recommendations that are included in it, the motion really needs to include the recommendations.
You'll find those recommendations on
I
Rick Walker's
apologize
memo
for
to the Select and
butting
Planning Board.
in, but
Okay.
I'll change my motion to include the comments by the Fire Chief Rick Walker and the acting road agent, Mr. Walker.
Can we revote, please, starting with select person Air?
Air aye.
Bailey, aye.
Hatch eye.
Hardikoff, aye.
Nap aye.
All right, try this one again.
Public hearing for the issuance of a building permit at 144 Longshore Drive, a private road for Peter Shaw, map 101, lot 53.
We reviewed this last week,
Yes, we did.
and we had...
Different Shaw.
Oh. Jeez, okay. And same area, though.
Different road, same area, yes.
Okay.
Same road.
Sorry.
One was Berry River, the other one is Longshore.
Okay.
Any questions, comments from the board, any discussion,
I have no comments, Mr. Chairman.
concerns?
So at the, pardon me, recommendation of our planner that we include in the acceptance that the cold patch on the road, it appears that the current road agent has recommended that cold patch on the road be graded and that the potholes be filled along that portion of the roadway. So I would make the motion that we accept the request for the building permit with the caveat that the attached recommendations for the road be fulfilled before CFO is issued.
I'll second that motion.
Air aye.
Bailey, aye.
Hatch eye.
Hardikoff, aye.
Nap aye. All right. Appointments, we have no appointments. And review of meeting minutes.
Move the minutes as written.
Second it,
Air aye.
Bailey, aye.
hatch eye.
Hardikoff, aye.
Nap aye. Public comments. Mr. Just a reminder for anybody, please come on up. Limit of 3 minutes per person, 15 minutes in total.
Peter Royce from Car Drive. I do appreciate your vote on my behalf, but I do want to make a point that the lot you just voted on is assessed as much as a lot right on Toland Road, like Kimball or LaPointe or anybody else. And I'm assessed for a well, even though it's a 20-foot dug well. I'm assessed for a septic, which would never be approved, which is 750 gallons, which is put in 1965. So what I'm really trying to comment on is that we really have some incredible discrepancies in our assessment policies. And I've tried to point this out to the assessors, and I've never asked for an abatement, but part of my motivation for asking for this move by the board is that I want to at least have my lot be equitable with others. And I think I've been taxed a lot more than I should have been for many years. And I'm sure there are dozens of other lots in the same category where I've tried to tell the assessors about it's a 750-gallon septic, it's a 20-foot well, and nobody cares. So I've paid a lot of money in taxes, which is okay. I'm just trying to say I think there are some big deficiencies in how we assess lots, and I just wanted to point that out. But again, I do appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. It's public comment. Any other public comments? Dan?
I understand your frustration and stuff, and I've come across on a couple of my lots and too, and I plan to abate some property, and there's no consistency. And then the town lands, we have seen that a lot on other lots too.
So anytime a resident, whether they're affiliated with the town or not, brings a concern of consistency with assessment to the town's attention, we turn it over to our assessor to understand the justification for that discrepancy. Select Person Ayer mentioned a discrepancy which we were able to identify and realize it was based on historical information which was no longer accurate. We were able to make that correction.
Oh, I thought it went to December.
So the correction's effective for the next tax year.
Oh.
So that change, the guidance was to file for an abatement for any assessment that you find to be disproportionate to the assessment of others in the community. And so certainly anytime it's brought to our attention, we seek to provide the justification for residents of how the assessments arrived on. Our assessors do make mistakes, and there's proper avenues in place for residents to pursue those mistakes, for whether it be having that conversation, having changes made, or filing for an abatement. So certainly if Mr. Royce wants to bring those specifics to my attention, I'll pursue it, certainly to my satisfaction and hopefully to his.
It's also my understanding that a buildable lot in Barrington is a buildable lot in Barrington, so I was not aware that we assessed based on wells and septic, just simply whether it was able to hold the home or not, for year-round code.
So there's one, from the very big picture, the job of the assessor and the only requirement from the State Department of Revenue Administration is that the assessor achieve fair market value for the properties. And so the methodology for doing so changes by assessor, and there's different ways to arrive at that fair market value. Our assessors use a very complex methodology. I say complex, there's a lot of detail. They use a lot of information to arrive at the assessments that they have. So feature items like a well or a septic or a hearth or other items attached to the lot are assigned a feature value which works into the assessment that way. And as far as a buildable lot isn't necessarily for assessment purposes a buildable lot across all of Barrington. So there's different neighborhoods, and A buildable lot on the lake has a base value of over $200,000, whereas a buildable lot in a more rural part of town has a base value of somewhere in the neighborhood of $60,000. And so a buildable lot, there's a lot of factors, and again, that's part of the methodology, but the big picture, the only thing the assessor is trying to do is achieve fair market value. And so that's where the state makes avenues available to residents for remediation if there's a reason to believe the assessor is not achieving fair market value, whether that's a disproportionality to the taxes another person pays or otherwise.
And one more question I would have for the town then would be, when we apply these different feature items in a fair market value assessment, do we have the computerized detail of data that when we apply it one place, we apply it consistently across the rest of the lake properties?
Yes, if appropriate.
Okay.
So the software program that we use, you're able to pull up properties based on features and find all the properties, for example, all the commercial properties or all the properties that have solar panels, something we'll talk about later this meeting. Yes, the program keeps track of that information and makes reports on that readily available.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, moving on to old business, the Panish Pledge Agreement.
So I'll speak to this, and John Wallace is here as well if you have more detailed questions.
As is Paul Panish, actually.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you. Welcome. Glad to have you here. So this is an agreement recommended by the Conservation Commission, part of the ongoing project to expand the Goodwill Conservation Area. This is a 20-acre piece of property off Ross Road. The intent and the use for this would be for a public parking area, small parking area, and trail access to the Goodwill Conservation Area. So this pledge agreement would be the first step of the process, which would conclude with a conservation easement later this year, with the goal to conclude by the end of this calendar year.
I shared this with the Town Lands Committee, and then they went on a walk too, Saturday morning, of the surrounding properties, and nothing came up, all positive comments on it.
Any other board comments? Nothing? Looking for a vote to accept the pledge agreement on, hang on one second, for the pledge agreement for the Panish property.
I'll make that motion.
And I would second that motion.
Air aye.
Bailey, aye.
That's right.
Hardikoff, aye.
Nap aye, and thank you very much, Mr. Panish, for
It's wonderful.
the land donation. All right, the Haley purchase and sale. This was the purchase and sale agreement for the 95.2 acres. It's part of the ongoing Goodwill Conservation Area expansion. Connor, do you have anything you would like to add on that?
Nope, those are the details I'm aware of. So 95.2 acres and reviewed by all of the current owners of that property.
John, do you have anything you would like to add?
Only, well, a couple things. First of all, that 95.2 acres is based on the tax maps, and who knows that, a survey will be done in the near future. Okay,
Sorry.
sure.
Thank you.
Sorry. Just want to say 95.2 acres, it may turn out to be different than that when the survey is done. Once these agreements are all signed, well, ideally tonight, the Southeast Land Trust will go to work on getting the survey going and so on and so forth, all the due diligence that one needs to happen to make this occur. And I talked to Dwayne High just a short while ago from Southeast Land Trust, and he's reasonably confident it will happen by the end of the year. There's possible couple of areas for wrinkles, but he hopes they won't happen, of course. I think that's about all I have to say.
More comments, Stan?
I also shared this with the Town Lands Committee, and they walked it, there's all positive comments.
Any other comments from the board? Do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
I would second that.
All right.
Air aye.
Bailey, aye.
That's right.
Hardikoff, aye.
Nap aye. All righty. Under new business, the return check policy. Connor, would you just speak to what has changed on policy?
So what's changed is the process to get off the returned check list. Yeah, exactly. And then the second change was being added to the list after the second offense, not the third. And one additional note indicating that somebody who, after having a first returned check, they are unable to cover that check with a check. So if after your first offense, you still owe from what was the return check, you cannot use a check to cover that expense.
Do we allow for redeposit?
In what instance?
So if the check came back and was bounced, and the person called and said, you know, in the past 24 hours, my automatic deposit has hit my account, can you redeposit the check? Do we allow for that?
I do not know, and because of how we deposit checks, we still physically deposit them at the bank, send them to the bank. I'd have to become more familiar with what happens to the check after the bank has non-sufficient funds.
And by doing that, there's still gonna be a charge.
Yep, there's a charge for the first time, but we're saying it can't be replaced with another physical check. My point in this is that the situation may be that in 24 hours,
I think if
the
it
direct
bounces,
deposit is, you know, you expect your direct deposit to hit, something has happened to delay the direct deposit. The direct deposit goes in, the funds are there, you would resubmit the negotiated item.
yeah, I don't think the bank will waive the late fee though.
No, but I also, I think it should not count as a bounced check in that particular instance, or exclude them from paying by check. I think for us to think that that doesn't occur is unwise. I mean, a lot of the new banking systems change the dates of expected, I don't know,
Yeah, so this came
I think
about
we could
last...
err on the side of being a little more lenient is what I was thinking.
So this came about last December because it became a problem cost to the town that we were not recouping, and inconvenience for the finance office to track an increasing number of non-sufficient funds checks. So the policy was initially adopted in December to that end, and the feedback after a 6-month review was that the folks that ended up on that list wanted to know how to get off the list, what they could do. And so this institutes a process where they can make a request to the finance office to explain the circumstances and request to be able to write checks to the town of Barrington again. But we also found that folks that were writing bad checks anyways, waiting for it to happen 3 times and accumulating those fees was not productive, because we were continuing to get bad checks, and the purpose of this is to stop collecting bad checks, to decrease the burden on the finance office and the cost of the town.
And
I agree with Connor, there's certain people that have a history of it and stuff, and I'm not perfect either. The bank would always call me on me that I bounce the checks and stuff, but they cover it, and then I have to go down there and deposit more money. Because I need paperwork, so I get behind sometimes.
George?
Yeah, do we, address to Connor, do we have any way to verify what Tracy brought up as to whether or not the deposit did not carry over?
I can absolutely ask what happens to the checks after non-sufficient funds, and if the check is eligible to be attempted to be deposited again. As I said, I'm not familiar with what happens now, so I can ask that question, and we can review that at the time.
But in all fairness, Selectman Hardcroft, select person, excuse me, I'm getting caught up again. But just to make sure that if the deposit hasn't cleared, how do we know that it's not a story, and can we prove the fact that it did not clear? And that for that being the reason the check was bounced? That's my question.
So that's the information that we get from the bank. I guess there isn't any subjective information as part of that. A check clears or it doesn't, and so that's what triggers the information back to the town, the cost back to the town, and Of course, we still have to pursue that original payment, which was insufficient.
Thank you.
Tracy?
So I guess my question is, the changes that we're experiencing is that we've become more rigid and more punitive. Instead of waiting for a third bounce check, now with the second bounce check, you're done.
Correct.
And within no other timeline.
So timeline was a topic of discussion for this policy, and the reality is the folks that are writing checks to the town sometimes are only writing 2 checks a year, either with in the town clerk's office or in the tax office. So a timeline didn't seem appropriate, because if somebody's writing 2 bad checks to the town, we don't. The recommendation from staff is that we don't wait for a third time and incur those costs, that we add them to the list and pursue other means of payment.
But we go back after the costs, correct?
We do when we can collect them.
And most people have automobiles that they're registering as well, and maybe even a dog that they're licensing.
When the activity's in the town clerk's office.
Yeah, I was just going to say, are there any other questions here before I request Peter's commentary? Peter, if you would, since you handle all of this.
Peter Royce again, I'm your treasurer, and I agree with Connor. To my knowledge, I know of no instance where anyone's ever asked for us to resubmit a check. And again, it could be ignorance on my part. I've been at this longer than Connor has by a long shot, but I know of no one who's ever asked for a resubmittal. But what he said, I think, is extremely important, is that some people bounce 2 or 3 checks. We had one person within 30 days who bounced 3. They just keep, it was a person who was going to go to lien, so they just kept trying to hold Linda at bay, which worked for a while. But after the third one, she said, well, I guess I've been a fool. I'll, go ahead with this. The 2 types of bounce checks we have are for insufficient funds, which is what we've been talking about. And the other is using the ACH process we have, where somebody isn't conscientious enough to write down their correct number. They either put down the wrong routing number or the wrong account number. And so those come back saying unable to locate, where they simply haven't put their right numbers down. But I think the biggest problem we have is, again, consistent with what Connor has cited, which is when somebody bounces check after check after check. And to me, what I thought was really the saving grace of this new policy as worded was that somebody can appeal to the finance department and get some exception if there is an extraordinary circumstance, which I think is fair. But rather than just say, let everybody go 3 times or whatever number of times, let them make their case and say, these are my extraordinary circumstances. This is my unfortunate circumstance. And I think that makes it very fair, because I don't think our staff in any capacity is really down on anybody. I think our staff is very people-oriented. And if there is a legitimate reason, I think they will hear that, and somebody could be put back on the write a checklist. So anyway, thank you for that. I just wanted to add to what Connor had already said.
So the only, I guess the only amendment then that I would ask for is, if you had someone with a return check who notifies us because of electronic banking, they're aware that something has happened, if they notify us prior to us being notified by our financial institution, I feel that that should not count as a first return check if it can't be resubmitted for some reason. That's a situation I just really, I really could, I think that will both enforce what you're asking, but would also allow us the leniency should someone, know, that their employer went bankrupt and what, I think there needs to be a slight amount of leeway in there for people.
And you don't believe that like, appealing to the finance officer gives them that leeway?
No, I think it could, if we kind of outline what I just suggested. Yeah.
So I'd be looking for a motion to make that adjustment or to approve as written.
Before we do anything, I think Peter had another comment he would like to.
What Tracy's saying is a very common occurrence. A lot of times, people will call the town clerk or the tax collector because their bank has already notified them that their check didn't make it,
Right.
and then they want to come in and make amends. So that's not an unusual case at all, I don't think. But again, I still think it's a procedure for the town to try to collect that. And I think, again, it's a one-time thing which doesn't exclude them from doing more checks. So I don't think that's really a penalty. It's the 2s and 3s, I think, that become problematic.
So how would the board like to proceed?
Well, I think input from the treasurer is valuable. He's the one that sees the money.
So based on the feedback I have heard, is from our treasurer is that the policy is all right as written and provides the flexibility for the town clerk or whoever to make a necessary adjustment, or the finance officer to make an adjustment if appropriate.
Is the petition verbal or is the petition written?
It doesn't indicate, I would imagine that it's written, and we can be specific if you'd like.
I think written would be important, that way you're not showing favoritism to anyone.
So would we, just like to amend this to say,
I would
Written
amend
petition.
section 3, the very last line, that says a petition by the offender must be made to the finance, a written
a
petition.
written petition?
Yeah. And once that change has been made, I would make a motion to accept the policy.
I'll make a motion to accept I'll second the motion to accept the policy with the change as proposed and to be amended.
Here,
I need a second. Oh, I seconded it.
I'll
Never
second.
mind. I'm sorry, I'm losing it tonight. Go ahead. Sorry, Dan. Carry on.
Bailey, aye.
hey, wait, I was going to say here, George.
I thought you did say it.
Nap aye.
Hardikoff, aye.
All right, thank you. Rough one. All right, the next item was the waiver.
Can we move this? We move the agenda and handle this last,
The waiver exemption for solar.
please.
Okay.
Would that be okay with
Is
everyone?
everybody amenable to pushing this to the back of the new business agenda?
Please.
No one seems to oppose.
Well,
I have a feeling this is going to be a long discussion. so
well, there is
let's hope
some
we
people in
can
the
move it.
audience that could give us feedback.
Okay, so you'd like to proceed?
Yes.
All right. So waiver exemption for solar. Connor, you want to?
Yeah, so the, one of the things that happens is the board is aware, currently the town is undergoing the 5-year required revaluation process, which is an assessing requirement from DRA to make sure that we are assessing appropriately, addressing our equalized ratio, and that the process is working. So any changes in assessing practice happen during a revaluation year, or sometimes in a statistical or partial update, which Barrington has had before. So as part of the revaluation, the assessor is looking at how solar is assessed in the town of Barrington. So previously, prior to this year, prior to tax year 2019, anybody with solar equipment in the town of Barrington, none of it added any assessed value to their property. And the reason is that assessors in our community and other communities across the state did not have reliable data to support the values for the added values for solar equipment on properties. And so if an assessor doesn't have the ability to have supporting evidence for adding value, they don't. And so up until this year, there haven't been any values added to solar. It is noted on the assessment card, but again, adds no value. So this revaluation process, assessors, not just in our community, but across the state, have data now that they understand a little bit better how to value solar. Some of the contributing factors for your information that make it difficult is there's no way for the assessors to know if the units are owned or leased. There's also no way for the assessors to know if the units are plugged in and actually generating any power. So those constraints have made it difficult. Also, there's a variety of hardware that exists. So this year, in the town of Barrington, our assessors will be assigning a value to solar equipment, and they'll be assigning a value of $5,000 to every solar equipment, regardless of size, regardless of stature, an assessed value of $5,000. That's the change of practice which our assessor will be undertaking this year. So the request to the board, so the town of Barrington by town meeting has already adopted and approved an exemption of $5,000 for solar, which what that means is with the proper exemption request of the town, anybody with solar equipment is eligible for a $5,000 reduction of the assessed value on their property because of having solar. So again, previously no value was added, but we had an exemption that dropped the value $5,000. So that exemption deadline is April 1st for the tax year 2019. So because of the circumstances where our assessor is changing the practice and now assigning a value of $5,000, we're asking that the board waive the exemption deadline specifically for the solar exemption due to the hardship created by changing the practice. And what that will allow us to do is send a letter and an exemption request to everybody in town that has solar equipment but does not currently have an exemption in order to give them an opportunity to apply for the exemption. So the $5,000 that's going to be assessed on their property for tax year 2019 will be able to be offset by that $5,000 exemption. And so again, the request to the board is to waive the exemption deadline due to the hardship of changing the practice of assessing solar equipment.
I feel that if someone has on a personal solar, and there's inconsistency where assessing the department, I don't think they should be charged. They're not making money. But if you have a solar field, you're producing, making money, a big productive commercial, yes, that should be taxed. But as an individual, I think it'll be too much confusion and stuff. So we get nothing. We don't add value or give them credit. Can we do that?
So it's a good question, and so the short answer is yes, that's possible. The long answer is it's not good practice. So again, the assessors are required to use methodology, and when a methodology encourages them to do one thing, and the governing body of a community forces them to do something different, that's not best practice. And so the assessing community is able to recognize that this equipment has value. Now, there's still a lot of details that are unclear or not always clear. And so I think this is a solution for the town of Barrington, which is very appropriate, that a value is assigned, recognizing that there is value for the equipment, and that the town of Barrington already has an exemption in place for the solar equipment. So I'll touch just for a moment on what some other communities do. So a lot of communities in Barrington have solar exemptions, similar to what we have in Barrington, but they're structured, some of them are structured different. So some of those exemptions are structured in a way to cover all of the added assessed value. So for example, if somebody had a solar equipment that the assessor valued at $20,000 and their neighbor had a solar equipment that was assessed at $35,000, the exemptions in those communities are written in such a way that the entire value of the solar equipment is exempted from taxes. So it's a different way to accomplish the same thing. And so the assessor and I talked about how that would look in Barrington. So that there's no The assessing community doesn't support entirely arriving at a high dollar value for solar equipment because there are a lot of variables. And so, whereas Barrington already has a town meeting approved exemption of $5,000 for solar equipment, this change of practice would then not also require a vote by town meeting to adjust how our solar exemption is structured. So communities do it different all across the state, and to Select Person Ayers' point about a solar farm. So that property would be assessed completely different than a residential property anyways, and very likely the assessors would use a revenue model for arriving at the assessment based on the revenue generated from solar producing equipment.
Dan?
Well, I think we'll open up a can of worms. And I think, is there any way to just leave it alone, not any value and stuff? Because people aren't making a killing off their solar panels. They get a break on the electric bill and stuff, but they're not making all kinds of money.
Tracy?
So I had done some research on this because I wanted to understand a little better and speak to it. The majority of the municipalities in New Hampshire, they exempt 100% of the assessed value. We can't do that without bringing it before the residents at the next town meeting and asking that we change that verbiage. My only concern, and I certainly agree with, if you are going to implement a $5,000 value, that you write to and alert every home that is going to experience a $5,000 increase, about $132 in taxes or so. The point I think that Select Person Ayers is making is an accurate point, which is you want to encourage solar usage, you want to reduce fossil fuel usage. I'm thrilled when there are homes that are placed in a way that can use solar and take advantage of that. So I would like to just keep in mind as we approached next year's warrant articles that we consider the idea of putting before our residents 100% of assessed value. That was, in order for me to really understand the impact, I had to drill it down to what 5,000 really meant. And it's a very small amount of money, but impactful for those people who would not be experiencing that feature item added to their bill. So as long as we're alerting them, then I would certainly say it would be appropriate to move the requested deadline for solar exemptions and allow them maybe an additional 12 months to be able to understand what has occurred and waive that portion of the increased feature item.
I would assume get rid of the December tax bill because then their ability to appeal and abate runs in April into April again.
Okay. And we're going to write to them all and alert them.
Absolutely. And you bring up an important point about the warrant for this year and voting process. And certainly when the board has the credit and exemption conversation, where we'll also discuss the veterans exemptions and credits and disabled credits, those will be, that same meeting we can talk about adjusting the solar exemption, how it's structured, and the possibility of putting that on the ballot. And so that certainly wouldn't change any decision here. Again, the change of practice that's proposed would create a hardship for the folks that don't currently have an exemption. And the deadlines, I would rely on the assessor, but absolutely, so a letter indicating the change of practice would be sent with a copy of the exemption request form to every resident that has solar equipment that doesn't currently have an exemption. There's currently 29 property owners with the exemption, so this would be to those that have solar equipment. And the way we know that they have solar equipment is because we already included on the assessment card, and also the folks who would have pulled a building permit when installing the equipment.
Okay, and we will, under new business, as we approach our creation of warrant articles, consider the 100% of assessed value so that we don't have to revisit this every time a new appraiser says that feature item is worth this amount of money.
It's really the right way to do it anyway, because then you're assessing value, you're accurately assessing value, not assessing value with an arbitrary number that has been plucked.
And what I will say, one thing I will say, and I don't disagree, and certainly the board, and I'll make sure the board has the information to have a thoughtful discussion about that at the time. One of the things that, in talking about this with the assessor and DRA, one of the things the Department of Revenue Administration encourages communities to stay away from is adding value when they know it will be taken off through an exemption. The reason for that is the data that we present to DRA, which they compile and use for a multitude of reasons, includes assessed value, but does not carry over the exemptions. So when we send up data, and if we assess somebody's solar equipment at $40,000, knowing that we're going to exempt it, that data that we send up carries the $40,000 assessed value. And that's really because the information that they're looking for is the assessed values of properties. So if what we are, if that practice of raising an assessed value, knowing that we're going to provide the exemption in every case such as this, there's some things to consider. And like I said, I'll make sure that the board has enough information to consider that at that future meeting, but that is something that came up just in preparing for this conversation.
Would we then, as a town, be responsible for paying more money to the state based on the assessed values that we
It's not used for equalization.
Okay.
So the exemptions and credits and all untaxable land is factored in for our equalized portion of county tax and the state schools tax and things like that. But for other reporting, a good question.
Motion to accept the change in the exemption requested deadline to move it out to
December 31st.
No later than
no later than December 31st of 2019.
I'll second the motion.
Air I.
Bailey, aye.
That's right.
Hardikoff, aye.
Nap aye. All right. Sorry, ma'am, public comment will come up here later. UNH dispatch contract for fire EMS. Rick, would you like to come up and talk about that?
So while Rick's walking up, this is the annual contract for our fire and EMS dispatch services through UNH with minor changes.
Last year was how much?
Same price. They anticipate, they're changing, as you see in the cover letter, the only thing you're gonna see is the changes. They'll give us the next year's rate by, it says September 1st, it'll probably be the middle of September, and she anticipates our cost to go down.
I like that answer, Chief.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because of, it's based on call volume, and others are going up and we're staying pretty steady, so she sees us maybe going down a little bit.
Great. Do I have a motion?
I'll
I'll make the motion,
I would second that motion.
and I already signed it. I'll pass it down.
Aye.
Hardikoff, aye.
Bailey, aye.
Air I.
The copy for signature is over here. Thank you, though.
Good try for my part.
We'll be here later
2019 tax deeding discussion, speaking of unpaid checks and things like that that we were talking about earlier.
Right, so I just wanted to start this discussion with the board tonight for future conversation. And so the tax deeding process, folks in 2019, folks who have past due taxes from 2016, from the lien on their property from 2016, are eligible for tax deeding. And so the deed date this year is August 29th. And so the date of August 29th, the properties that are eligible for deed are either going to be deeded or have to have an approved deed waiver. And that deed waiver is issued by the select board. And so right now, there's 46 properties on the list that would, if deed day was today, would be eligible for tax deeding. It is our estimation that many of those will cover their 2016 lien prior to the deed date. And as we move closer, I'll make sure that the board has up-to-date information. There are some properties that we won't take because they contain contaminated property. There's some properties that we won't take because they have federal liens or are in bankruptcy. So of that 46 right now, 32 properties would be before the board that no deed waiver is requested. And so in the town hall, the process that we go through, so our tax office that works with these individuals and property owners has extensive records of what kind of payments they've been making, if they're on a payment plan, if they've been delinquent before, the history of the property. So that's information that we're considering. Additionally, for some of the properties we already have, and as it gets closer, we'll have our building inspector visit all the properties. And so what we're looking for in an instance like that is to make sure that there isn't any undue liability to the town by taking the property. Now, it's not generally good practice to avoid taking properties because that encourages taxpayers to think they live tax-free, right? And so the bar for a recommendation from the building inspector to not take a property for liability purposes is pretty high for that reason. So I wanted to mention this to the board specifically because the board will have to act on August 26th. So we'll have certain staff recommended deed waivers for that meeting on the 26th, and we'll have all the other properties under consideration for the board. So I want to make sure if there's specific information that you'd like to have regarding the property, that we have that for you in advance of the meeting so we can make the decisions necessary on the 26th. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Dan?
Informational purposes, the town lands committee, at what point could they review and give comment?
That's a great question. And so that information could be made available to the Lands Committee at any time. And specifically for properties that the Lands Committee would want to sell. So I'm gathering some information for the board about how these properties are able to be sold afterwards. So the town of Barrington adopted a tax deed process and is statutorily required to offload these properties in a certain way. And with certain restrictions. So practice in the town of Barrington has typically been to hold the properties for 3 years. The reason for that is because property owners that the property was taken from still have rights to those properties in the first 3 years. They could pay past due taxes and any costs incurred throughout the process at that time. So I'll make sure to have that information available, but to your point about going to the Lands Committee, I would think that it might be valuable for the Lands Committee to consider the properties, but not until after they were deeded, I would imagine.
Tracy?
So one of the things you have tasked us with is what other information would we need. I would like to know what exemptions had been applied to the properties.
Okay.
I'm very interested in the single elderly exemption, so if we're to take one, I would like to know that that has occurred.
Absolutely.
George?
Only thing I'd ask for is to have the current payments past 5 years on each piece that comes up. I think that would cover everything, and also probably some Hardikoff's concerns would be in that also. So if you'd add hers to it, it would work out well.
I understand.
Thank you.
Any other discussion?
No, I would,
We don't need a motion
No.
or anything for this.
okay.
Okay, then we're gonna move on. Next item is the extension of the lease for 333 Caleb Highway. Hopefully this will be the last one.
Second to last, probably. August 1st, 2020 is tall order.
Better get moving.
We're gonna get the inflatable building
Yeah.
and just blow it up, be ready
Just
to
hit
go.
go. So I've negotiated an extension of our contract at 333 Caleb Highway for the town offices under the same terms and same price. So I'd be looking for a motion to enter into this one-year lease and authorize the town administrator to sign.
Yes, Dan.
There is a lot of conditions with that. Should we just budget in all the conditions?
So absolutely, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one condition that Select Person Air is likely talking about is that our contract requires us to repair the damage to pavement from winter maintenance. And so we've occupied that facility for 8 years, and it's not unreasonable to assume that repairing that pavement would mean replacing that pavement. And so absolutely, that's something that we plan on budgeting
I
for.
don't know if I would say that. I would let somebody else make that assessment and determination. We may just have to repair the pavement.
Yeah, I would agree.
So we'll have that conversation, but the point being that we are planning to budget for the requirements contained within the contract.
So I would make a motion to approve the lease extension and authorize the town administrator to sign it.
I'll second it.
Period of time. What's the time on the extension release?
It's a one-year lease.
Okay.
Thank you.
Roll call vote?
Conversation. Is it 1 year, 18 months or something?
No, 1 year, still 12 months.
I thought it went up to 18 or something. Month by month.
This is set for August 1st, 2019 to August 1st, 2020.
All right. There are.
Failure.
Hatch aye?
Hardikoff, aye.
Matt, right. My suggestion is maybe we'll have to just give us to bridge that closing out. Okay, goals. Sorry.
If all goes with it.
Yes, as it should.
Yeah.
Goals for the 2020 budget process discussion. Connor, would you like to?
So the advisory budget committee met with the new group of individuals, including 2 new members to the advisory budget committee as a kickoff meeting and to have a conversation about the budget process as a whole. I've also been discussing the budget process with department heads at recent department head meetings. And one of the questions that has come up on a couple of occasions is to give the board an opportunity to set any broad goals for the budget process moving forward. And so whether that's a percentage increase or set as a value percentage increase or other specific goals, the select board would like the advisory budget committee and department heads to consider.
Tracy?
So one of the things that I heard from the advisory budget committee last year and from department heads was that they did not prefer the timing of when we were addressing line items. So in order to respect those thoughts, perhaps if there is a deviation in a line item where the prior year's expenditure is, and for me, I would say significantly less than what's being requested, I would ask that we be prepared and ready for why that difference is in the budget to begin with. Because I think that's where we were identifying the potential for savings. And if there is a deviation, I think it needs to be explained. The other thing I think that happens is in the presentations, there's a lot of really valuable information shared, but then we're not able to digest it as quickly. You know, we're listening instead of looking. I'm highlighting as people are talking, and transparency requires us to be asking the questions in a public format. If we can come up with a way that we can both be transparent but not appear to be, you know, our goal is not to nickel and dime the budget and the department heads. So maybe my first suggestion will eliminate that. If there's a deviation of more than what, 10%?
Sure.
Have a, you know, be ready and prepared with the budget to explain why the deviation is there. And that way, that public back and forth of feeling, you know, bright light shining on you, where were you the night of? No, you get the point. Okay.
So what I'm hearing is that the select board would find value in some summarized and specific information about the budget process. So certainly, as in previous years, the town offices and the finance department will compile the budget information, which will include historic information, the previous budget documents, and each department's detailed budget presentation materials they've provided. But what I'm hearing is it might also be valuable to have something presented in a simpler format which identifies the discrepancies. So maybe it's an increase of 10% or more, or where the expenditures are, the anticipated expenditures for 2019
Never
are more
reached
than
the
10%
threshold
than
that they,
what
yeah.
they have. And so that's certainly information that we can compile and make sure that the board has access to prior to the department presentation. And I think to your point about questions, I think that's a good point. I think it's important that that dialogue happen in a transparent public forum. I think the Advisory Budget Committee does a great job preparing their questions ahead of time for department heads. And I think that it would be beneficial, certainly, if in review of materials prior to a department presentation, if any individual select board member had questions that they'd like the department head to be able to address at the meeting, at their presentation, that they too would send that to me ahead of time that I can share with the department head. And so that would allow the department head to be prepared to address that question for the chance that it might require some additional data collection. So I don't think it's, I think there's a happy medium where the questions could be sent ahead of time and still asked in a public forum, but given the department heads an opportunity to prepare an answer, and certainly the finance office. As I've said before, I intend to have a member of the finance office here for every meeting with access to our financial programs and records, to hopefully also be able to act as a resource for those questions that we haven't previously been able to answer during the budget process.
George?
Well, last year, as chair, made the mistake of going through the budget on a faster pace than what we really should have been to make that budget acceptable. One of the things that the ABC has come up with and has made a request of, and has to be with your approval, is that each department have its own section, so everything that department has submitted will be in one section completely. We won't have to go through, it's been recommended and put forth there, the board approves it, so it will be all in one section at a time. And then during that time, the questions that didn't get answered until, say, midnight like we did last year, will be answered at the time that we do this. And so that has been something they came up with. So it would make it a lot easier. And then we would have the budget book ahead of time. So we would still have the opportunity to review it. And as Connor had suggested, is that we submit our questions, I don't know, to the, either to whoever's decided upon, the chair says, okay, to Connor, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that way it'd make it a lot easier for all of us to go through, and everything would be there in that particular part of the budget. And I think that that would work. Also, what we did last year is that we had the ABC present during the budget presentation, so after the board finished with their conversation and questioning of the particular person, that they were allowed to move forward and ask their question at the same time. So in essence, what it did, make it a lot easier for the ABC rather than turn around and having to have a separate meeting to talk to that individual. It was all taken care of in one place. It was something else for the board to consider. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dan?
Since I have a simple mind, every line item, if it's a positive or negative, changing it, we should be notified, because there could be cost savings that we'll be made aware of.
You get it when you get your budget packet, if you look at it, it gives you the prior year's budget, the amount expended, the current year, so you can actually see if they ran a positive or a negative.
But if they plan on cutting out that, instead of carrying over the same, if they plan on cutting it, they should tell us.
They usually do. That's usually part of that.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you, select person here. I think what I'm getting at is, if it's a 10% cut, what's the justification for it?
Right.
If it's a 10% or more increase, what's the justification? And I guess that's the detail that, if it was there and it was available, I mean, I have a very simplistic budget I prepare for a board, and there's a column that simply says, here is why that deviation is occurring year to year.
Well, I got colorblind last year with my highlighter.
I want to respect the different perspectives of how the budget process should be discussed.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anything else you'd like to add?
Any other goals that the board would like me to pass on to department heads and the advisory budget committee for this 2020 budget process?
George?
I would like to see a more timely update in the paperwork. Instead of waiting for 2 or 3 or 4 departments to be done, we could have it in a little bit more timely manner. And that should, however, the chair should decide on that, but that would help a lot.
So, how does the board feel? I know we're talking about the budget process, but I know I haven't seen a recent budget update in a while. I know there's one here now.
Great.
In an ongoing manner, one of the pieces I had talked with Connor about separately to discuss with the board was around the idea of, one of the ways that I do it is I put my budget together and I kind of give people an idea month over month, am I red or am I green? And if I'm red in my budget, why am I red? If I'm green, okay, I'm on target. Are we under budget? And then by how much I'm under budget? Just as a way to make sure that there's very quick and clear visibility for the board to see how we're doing with regard to expenditures and expenses. Things
Well, I
like
think
that.
any input from the budget committee that they think would make it work better, easier, or whatever. I know they were more satisfied last year than they've been, but there might be something that even could change more. So,
Peter, do you have anything you would like to add?
If I may,
You may.
I was going to wait for public comment.
Well, since
It
you're
seems like
you're
it-
part of the budget committee, it makes sense to include you in this discussion.
I want to reinforce a couple of things that Selectperson Hardikoff said. One of the things the Budget Committee would like to see, and I think Connor alluded to this, is some explanation as to where a department head thinks the budget item will be by the end of the year. And again, consistent with what the chairman just said, some departments spend a lot at the end of the year, some spend, like highway spends a lot in the middle of the year. So you can't necessarily look at what's been expended versus what's been appropriated. So some kind of explanation line by line, as to why things are high or low, I think would be very beneficial, and I think that's consistent with what you were talking about. Again, one of the things we talked about in the Budget Committee meeting just, was it George last week? I don't remember. But is to have more feedback from the board as the budget process moves forward. And that doesn't mean you have to make a firm commitment. What I think the Budget Committee has done historically is to say, okay, well, that seems okay, let's wait until the end of the process and we'll evaluate what the total is at the end of the process. And I think you folks could do the same thing, but at least to get some response, if you will, to where the budget proposal is. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Depends on how the bottom line ends up. I mean, that's what we've done in the Budget Committee for a long time, and I think that might be appropriate. And it might save some of the long discussion at the end of the process that you had last year, where I couldn't stay up that late. I'm old. I don't know if Dawn made it or not, but
he had to bring that in.
we're in this together, Dawn. So, but anyway, that was definitely too long of a meeting for me, and if we could compact that a little bit by some adjustment, that would be very much appreciated.
Thank you. All right, are we ready to move on from that one? Any other comments? All right. The road naming authorization for E911, would you like to talk about the Christmas stuff?
Yeah, so I'll speak to that, and Chief Walker's here as well, and he'd be a valuable resource to fill in the blanks or address any questions. So basically, the new road being built near the center of town at 9 and 125, being built by Holy Rosary Credit Union, will need a name soon. A name?
The road's being built by Holy Rosary
Yes. That's my understanding.
because they have a location.
There's nothing on application with the planning board, but I believe that's the intent.
Very good, thank you.
So,
Hold on, let's let Connor finish his explanation, and then I will ask for comment.
Sorry. So this road will need a name. A name hasn't been proposed yet, so the board has naming authority for roads in town. There's a list previously approved by the board that new roads can choose from, not require an action of the board for approval. This specific instance has a few other constraints because the original Christmas Lane, which turns off Route 9, will need to be closed prior to the opening of the other road. The state will only allow one entrance for that property. So there's a small window of when that road's closed off and the new one, and that other road can't be opened until it has a name. So I'm here because we suspect that the folks will ask for a name that isn't on the list, which will go to the E911 committee for review for conflicts with other roads in town. And because the board isn't meeting on the 12th for regular board business, not again until the 26th, we suspect that the road will be complete and need a name prior to that. So what we're asking for from the board is for this one-time situation to authorize the E911 committee to approve the name, given that it meets the criteria of the committee with no conflicts. And certainly if they chose a name on the list, then we wouldn't need to have this conversation. But should the case happen that they don't choose a name from the list, we'd like to be able to have the E911 committee approve the road name without an action of the select board, a separate action of the select board.
And
I have two questions, or one answer. Tracy, there's a joint venture between the landowners and Holy Rosie on that roadway, I believe. And they can't use the same sign, cover it up? The same name and cover it up till...
So the road name will be different because Christmas Lane will remain a road in the town of Barrington. And that road will, so Christmas Lane will, instead of starting from Route 9, Christmas Lane will start from in front of a property that's there and continue on to the end. So it'll be a new name.
other comments, Stan? Is that everything? George?
Yes, as Chief Walker, I hope, will allude to, that many years ago, we spent time up at the Capitol building making a discussion over 911 so the approval could go back to the towns to do this. And my question is that once we're finished doing this, in order to maintain ourselves with the 911 emergency numbers, who is going to notify them that we have changed our the road name and we still comply with the 911 setup for the phone system throughout the state, in the town of Barrington, and with the town of Barrington.
1 second. Are there any other comments or questions from the board? Please, Rick.
So if I may, just to bring some of you up to speed, probably the best 3 or 4 years of my life was renaming all the names in this town, all the road names. So there's a committee of 5 people were put together, and by attrition, I figured out real quick a couple weeks ago I was the only one left. So I pushed my way around and got Tiffany and Connor and myself and Chief Williams, and who am I missing? Anyway, so our task is to, when somebody submits a name, is to see if there's a conflict with the 911 standard. The state law is pretty clear that the selectmen have the final authority to name road names. A number of years ago, the Board of Selectmen approved a list of somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 road names, as Connor alluded to if somebody came in one of those names and we looked and saw no conflict, then we didn't have to come back to the board. And part of the reason the board did this was because we were doing a few names at that point. So just kind of as a little bit of heads up, I met with Garth the other day over on site, and the new paved road that is expected, that is being completed right now, coming off Route 9 and really goes straight in and stops at Christmas Dove, is excuse me, designed to continue should development occur out there, whether commercial or residential or maybe nothing. But that road is intended to continue. Christmas Lane is gonna be take a right just after you go by the Swenson's current home, between their home and the Christmas stuff. Christmas Lane will go off to the right. It will service Mr. and Mrs. Svenson's house, Garth's house, and the current house out back. So for our purposes, they're going to come in with a name, and I'll just tell you that they're going to call it Main Street, and if it gets approved, Christmas Lane will be the first right off from Main Street. That's how we're going to know it for 911 purposes. So that's why we kind of have to, before we can say where Christmas Lane is, we've got to have a road for Christmas Lane to be part of, and as Conrad alluded to, we're asking for a special permission in this case because we anticipate that they'll come forward long before you folks will get to meet on it again. They're aware of the fact that we got to get cartographics involved. The address will change for the 3 residences based on the length of the road. But we've got Garth and the current developer are going to meet and try to come up with a road name that meets the town's needs.
Dan?
I support everything he says.
Comments? Looking for a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion.
So my only comment, Chief, is I would prefer that we not call that road Main Street.
It probably wouldn't work anyway.
I would definitely prefer we not call it Main Street. Oh, there we have it.
Do we need to approve the committee, Mr. Chairman? The new people appointed to that committee?
I do not know the answer to that one.
It's an advisory committee of staff, and so I do not believe it requires an action of the board to add membership to that committee.
We just want to make sure we don't end up with like Walker Lane or something like that.
Trust me, that was brought up before, and you're right, I don't want that either. And we are advisory only in nature, and typically what's happened in the past is we've done the legwork to make sure that we didn't believe it would be a conflict. That's why there's 5 or 6 of us on the committee, because we actually had a road came up for the development that's proposed on 125, and 3 or 4 of us saw a conflict with the road we already have in town, so the developers in the process come up with another one. So that's why there's 5 or 6 of us, so there's not one person, and whenever we came forward and made a recommendation to the 5 of you, you're not obligated to take what we say anyway.
So I would make a motion that there be a one-time authorization for the currently formed E911 Road Naming Committee to approve the road lane on the newly constructed road leading to the Christmas Dove property, with 2 caveats, please, that it not be named Main Street, Main Road, Main Drive, and that it also not be called Town Center anything, please.
I will second that motion. Roll call vote.
Air aye.
Bailey, aye.
Patrick.
Hardikoff, aye.
Nap aye.
Thank you, I will forward that to Garth, your request, so, thank you.
Plays on the word name.
What's wrong with Maine?
It's not
Nothing
Main
at
Street
all.
in Barrington.
All right. School board joint board meeting.
So, as I made the board aware, I invited the school board to participate in the Barrington All Boards meeting on August 12th. I had a discussion with the chair explaining my intent for the meeting, giving groups in town an opportunity to update the board and the community really of completed projects and upcoming projects as a quick 10-minute summary. So as a counteroffer, the school board proposed scheduling a separate joint boards meeting just with the school board and select board to discuss a similar slate of topics, completed, ongoing, and upcoming projects, or alternately, which I was made aware has happened previously, but not for a while, requesting a meeting of the chairs of the select board and school board with myself and the superintendent. So I wanted to let the select board know that that counteroffer was made, and if you'd like me to pursue either of those options, I'd be happy to. I intend, and the superintendent has agreed, we're going to make every effort to meet quarterly, absent of any political attendance from the school board or select board, to stay better in tune to what's going on in the school side and the town side, and make an effort to do that. I think it's important that both the school and the town work collaboratively, especially through the warrant and voting process. And so I think there would be value in having either meeting proposed, but regardless of that, I intend to meet with the superintendent in order to stay close to those issues.
Tracy?
Is there a reason that they can't make the August 12th meeting?
A reason was not cited.
Other comments from the board?
Well, I think that the selectmen should meet as a group.
I would agree with that.
Gives us an opportunity to meet our counterparts.
I think it also gives the public the opportunity to have both boards present for any
Absolutely.
questions, comments, or other concerns.
Turns the heat up.
Okay?
Would you like me to try to schedule a joint board meeting of the school board and select board?
Please.
Yes.
Are there any recommendations of dates or months, day of the week?
They're all pretty terrible.
Yeah, so the school board generally meets on Tuesdays, is my understanding. Select board generally meets on Mondays. I can pick, I have a all boards meeting calendar, and generally at the end of the months, given that a lot of groups meet the second and fourth or first and third days of the month, a lot of times the end of the month has traditional meeting dates open, and so I can try to find a date there where folks are unlikely to have conflicts. I'll pull this up. So in August, the 27th, the 27th is a Tuesday, and is the fourth Tuesday. I don't have scheduled meetings of the 10 or 12 groups included on this calendar. July, Monday the 29th or Tuesday the 30th, that's too soon.
So the 27th, so we would not meet on the 26th as a board, we would meet on the 27th.
No, I would actually, I would propose that this meeting be treated as a separate meeting outside of board business. We'll have quite a bit of content to cover on August 26th because we won't be covering board content on August 12th at all boards meeting. So I wouldn't want to limit the time that the board has to make important decisions you do.
So every other department is doing a 10-minute presentation at the all boards meeting.
To be clear, we have one RSVP from groups, but in conversation with many groups, I understand that they'll be attending. The deadline to respond to Tiffany is the 31st. So we'll be reaching out and making sure that folks that haven't responded have intended that way.
Thoughts?
Anything that week, Mr. Chairman, 27, 28, 29, those 3 days, I can make those.
So I can try for the last week of August, and I can be in touch with the board with what other availability exists.
I guess I would want to see an agenda, to be honest with you. If we're giving 10 minutes to every other group, and I and Dawn alternately attend the school board meetings.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think an agenda lets you know what's scheduled to be discussed.
So, and again, the original invitation on my part to have the school board participate in the all boards meeting was nothing more than an opportunity to mention as a summary completed ongoing and upcoming projects. Not as
Major
much.
initiatives that are
Right.
planned in their strategic planning process.
Exactly.
And I guess, time is very valuable in taking another night out of the week and not knowing what, other than 10 minutes of, can you share with us major initiatives that are part of your upcoming strategic plan for the next year?
One of my fears is that two of us meeting together is that question and answer could exceed more than what we anticipate. I think that needs to be, a limit should be set on that.
But you'll have all your fish in one barrel.
That's right.
No, I think it's a good
Would
idea.
you like you and I to work on putting together a proposed agenda and then we'll come back? Or send it out to the board to review and then if everyone's good with it, we'll move forward with coordinating and scheduling.
I think to be on the safe side, we should just allow the chair in the corner to do it. And that way there won't be any,
No, I believe we need to meet as an entire board.
that's what I'm saying. No, I'm saying set up help do the agenda.
Okay,
Just the two of you do the agenda, that way we can move forward faster.
okay.
That's my opinion.
Is everybody in agreement with that?
That's fine.
Can we limit the meeting to an hour?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I know.
Great.
This will be publicized or not publicized, because the all boards meeting is publicized, which means we have complete transparency for our residents, and so I'm hoping we're gonna publicize this.
Absolutely.
It has to be where there's more than
Okay.
three of
You're
us.
gonna have, you're gonna have both, not only are you gonna have more than three of us, but you're gonna have both boards there, so it'll
Okay.
be very public meetings.
Very, very important that it's publicized. Thank you.
Absolutely. Staff report?
So the only item not covered, two items not covered under other board business is on the topic of the all boards meeting. And select person, or Chairperson Knapp, this goes back to what you were talking about with the update of the budget and goals. So my intention for the all boards meeting to prepare for the select board to discuss and present is a budget update and goal analysis. So as a one-time thing that we can certainly continue throughout the year, but an opportunity to look at where we are so far through the year with the budget, highlights and lowlights, and then also review the goals set by the select board and the progress in each category. So again, something that the board or the chair could present and identify. So the reason that I've provided you a printout copy of the budget up to date from Friday of last week is I'd like the board to take an opportunity over the next week or so to review the budget, just thumb through, and if there's specific items that stand out to you that you'd like to make sure that I address in the budget analysis, just send me an email and let me know. There's certainly things that that I will be addressing, and hopefully the items that stand out to you are items that I already plan to address. But I wanted to get that in front of you soon, so that if there was feedback, we could make sure to have that included. So that's the plan for the all boards meeting, and I'll have that summary and analysis to the board ahead of time, and certainly the chair if you'd like to present it. Second item I'd like to share with the board is, as you're aware, previously the technology individual in the library, David Berube, retired, took a position closer to home, and so that position was reconfigured slightly and put out for advertisement, and I'm happy to report that the new individual in that position has started. His name is Adam Schlager. He hails from Portsmouth. He's very excited to take the position, and the library is very excited to have him. So his position will remain technology heavy in that facility, offering services to the community and also supporting the library. His wife is actually the library director in Stratham and has been for 20 years. So he brings a lot of insight and exposure to libraries, and the town's excited to have him. So I want to make sure I shared that with the board.
Ms. there been any more discussion with them or hopeful progress that they may be interested in utilizing Rockport?
So brought that up every occasion that I can, and there is currently no interest.
It's a shame. Okay.
Clerk.
Municipal Office Administrator.
I am requesting for signature a state DRIPA 28 form request, a payroll manifest for checks dated 7/18/2019, accounts payable manifest 2019-58 dated 7/18/2019, 2 land use change tax warrants, a right-of-way warranty deed for Wildcat Road, and the Panish Pledge Agreement.
Very good, thank you very much. Select persons reports, person there.
I went to the conservation, they're gonna review and do a score list on the contractors of the Goodwill parking. I think an individual came down and signed a spreadsheet, maybe it's you. And then Saturday, we had a good meeting with Town Lands. We went for a nice walk and stuff. And it was hot out, but we were in the shade. And one thing that'll be mean hot, no ticks. That's it.
No
Gee,
ticks.
I've had ticks in the last 2 weeks that I've never had a tick on me. Last 2 weeks. I hate it. And then the bats and
course.
spiders.
Okay.
All right. Select person Haley.
Well, needless to say, I missed the last meeting, I was out of town, so I have nothing to report, it's true.
Select
Our
person
meeting
Hench.
was canceled.
I gotta get on that one.
That's my baby.
Select person Markcom.
I attended the Rec Commission meeting. They're working on updating what they currently have for their building blocks spreadsheet that does the projections of expected expenditures from the revolving fund for the rec department. And they voted alternate Dale Sylvia onto the actual rec commission itself. And he's going to take over that responsibility of reviewing the building blocks program and see if he'd like to adopt that responsibility. And there are 3 open positions of a program coordinator, an administrative assistant, and an evening and weekend supervisor available and being published for filling at the rec department. And I think that was about all that we covered.
All right. So the building committee, I had a conflict at work, so I was not able to make that meeting, but I will actually ask if Mr. O'Brien, as the chairman, would like to say anything about the building committee meeting.
Good evening, Casey O'Brien, 24 Hall Road, Chairman of the Building Committee. The last meeting, we went over some, we went over another town's contract of how they put it out to bid, and decided that using that base for a contract would work very well for us moving forward. Our next meeting is Wednesday morning, Andy. So we're supposed to come back, or everybody is taking that contract. Connor, do you remember who that was? I can't even think of.
When you say contract, do you mean RFP? Oh, RFQ.
Yeah, so
What was that?
Keene, the city of Keene put out an RFQ for a fire station.
Right.
And so we were able to secure that RFQ with the responses to get an idea of what a submittal like that would solicit for responses.
Excellent.
So Wednesday, we'll take everybody's ideas, kind of put them in as one, and see if we can come up with a somewhat decent RFQ, and hopefully go out sooner than later and get the board's blessing on that, so.
Great, thank you.
All right. Planning board had met and just went over some final reviews, which actually were before the board tonight on private roads. And then there was, I'm trying to think what the other discussion was on. I don't have those notes with me right now. It was just, I believe it was just a wrap-up for extensions with a couple of the land developments, and one of them being the one side of the road being pulled on Meeting House Lane. So it was a fairly quick meeting for the most part. Record time for planning was great.
You're sure.
And then the technology committee is going to meet on the 5th, which I actually will be on vacation that week, so I will not be there for that meeting as well.
And we'll just mention about that, the technology, one of the big topics that the technology committee will be meeting to review is a presentation from the police department. They've had a committee working on what the implementation of body cameras would look like. And so they'll be going to the technology committee for a presentation and to seek feedback. And the plan is to have that conversation with the select board at the August 26th meeting. So that presentation will go through the technology committee prior, and then that'll be part of the discussion on the 26th. And based on the discussion and decisions from the board, that would be a budget consideration.
Tracy?
In reference to that, when that is brought forward for a report out, could we ask for any experience in increase of liability, insurance liability rates that may occur with the usage of that equipment?
Good question. I'll have an answer to that.
Thank
I'd like to
you.
use the word decrease on that.
It might be.
Change.
Change. And I think that on the town administrator's report is the recognition of a number of July work anniversaries with an average, I see, of almost 10.5 years for the employees. That says a lot about Barrington as a municipality, as an employer.
Absolutely. Anything else you would like to add?
No, thank you. I'd like to have a non-public discussion for personnel, legal, and reputation.
When we get there?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's all I got.
George?
No, I was just to remind the chair already said it. Thank you.
Anything else any of the select board members would like to comment on or discuss?
Summer camp's halfway done.
Some camps have.
Now it's flying.
And I see, and we didn't talk about it in here, maybe I missed it, but we have completed all of our paving and we just have some line striping left to be done in
That's
town.
pretty exciting.
So moving right along there.
Thank you, interim road agent.
Yep, very much. And public comment. Mayor, would you like to come on up and thank you for being patient with us as we work through.
That's all right. It's not a big deal. I'm Pat Gingrich and I live at 32 Peabody Way. And I'm here because I'm on a rotating schedule with people from the library. So I just want to remind you that we're working very hard to continue to raise money and to bring out the vote so we can get a positive vote next year. And we just are a teeny tiny bit away from the 500,000. We got a big $10,000 gift this week. So that's cool. That's one thing. The other thing, I have a question about the solar thing, because I just wanted to know. I have solar panels on my house, and this is the 5th year since they first came, and we put them on after they came. So do I understand it that the value of the house is supposedly going up $5,000, but that it won't affect the tax rate for us because we're also going to be given
exemption.
an exemption.
If you file for it.
If you file, so you have to know the rules about filing.
That's why they're gonna send you the exemption.
Okay, I'm hoping for that, but that doesn't, we don't have to do that the next year and the next year, every year, do we have to do it?
No, so an exemption, once it's on file, it carries forward.
Okay, and then in 5 years, when the next evaluation is, do they say, well, now it's worth 8,000 or anything like that? I don't know, does it change? You just make it one time, 5,000?
So I think one of the conversations had at the select board level is looking at how the town offers that exemption. And so certainly for the town meeting vote this year, it sounds like there's interest at the board level to reword that exemption to maybe include all assessed value. And so that would be, that's not a decision the select board can make. The select board can put it on the warrant, and that would be a decision that the voters make. And so if that were to happen, then it wouldn't matter how the value changes, because the exemption would cover it.
Okay,
But
I like that one, that idea. I do like that idea. The other thing is, if the house then gets sold, is that like in part of the deal then in terms of their value? Like we would say, well, it's worth 5,000. It's really worth like 40,000, 50, or 35,000. But I don't know. Then would their taxes go up?
So that's a good question. There's three values. There's probably much more, but there's the assessed value, which is much different than the fair market value, which is much different than what people pay for a property. And so for assessing purposes, that's not a good number to go on when you're buying property. Definitely use it as a resource. But for things like exemptions and credits and how those numbers are arrived at, that isn't a valuable. That isn't the only number that folks should use, and certainly any good real estate agent. Good question.
And then one more, I go down Beauty Hill every day and I see that ice heave part of the road and I don't see any work being done on that for the last 2 years, even though we had to make it like one lane two winters ago. Is that on the agenda at all?
That would be something we have discussed with the acting road agent. And prior road agent was around, there had to be some major work done in that area, including drainage and culverts. I don't know if Rick has an update or anything he'd like to talk about at this point, or if you're just kind of waiting until we hired a new road agent for that.
And that was one of the roads listed on the road list that was presented to the board a few meetings ago as the list of roads for consideration for work for next year. And so, as Chairperson Knapp indicated, there are many things that could be done, and arriving at what the best thing to do is certainly the process of or role of the town to be presented to the select board.
That's really a dangerous intersection, and not just that road, but I really just am thankful every day that I don't get killed there. Because turning left, and they say elderly people have the worst time turning left, it's just awful. It really, I don't know if we have to have someone, T-bone there and die before they put a light up or anything like that.
Fortunately, to that point, the town was selected, and that intersection specifically was selected for a safety audit. And so that intersection will be studied by the state. We'll actually be meeting out there in the next couple of weeks with a committee from the town and the state to study that very intersection. So do know that your concerns are heard, and we are working.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Pat, if you could just hold there for 1 second, because I think Dan wants to respond, and I actually have a question for you.
Okay.
Yes, it's been through all the department heads, through the road and the engineers. We have different options up, and then next paving season we'll look at the options. And then the intersection is a state road. We have no control over it. The intersection.
Okay. My question was around a sign, and I haven't seen it, so I can't speak to it, but it was brought to my attention that is right around the four corners, 125 and...
The library sign?
Yes, one that shows a picture of like I believe it's a handicapped child or something.
Mhm.
Experiencing disabilities.
It says that we need a library that is accessible to all. That's what it says on it.
Just for clarity standpoint, our library is currently accessible,
No.
correct? You can't get in there or,
You can't access books without asking for someone to help you because it's way too tall and it's way too low. We have like so many rows of books that I can't access the top or even the second to the top, and I get kind of dizzy going down to the very floor. So in that sense, it's not accessible.
okay, and nothing in the new library will put somebody into that compromised position?
No.
Where they won't be able to,
No, because there'll be more bookcases and they'll be lower.
but not too low?
They'll be the right way, whatever it is. But yeah, that's one thing. We're trying to, the next one that's coming out is seniors, so you'll see something about a place to connect for seniors and for everyone, really. Because when I first moved, I can go on, but you probably don't want to. But when I first moved here from Iowa in 2012, I didn't know anyone except my daughter. And then I went to the library, and that's how I found out. First of all, I like to talk to kids about nature, and I used puppets, and they asked me to do that in the kids section, and that was fun.
All these signs, do you need sign permits for it, or?
That's why my question is, because I've been.
Well, we had that thermometer, I don't know.
I think, because,
It's not a permanent sign, it's.
yeah, but it's only 30 days and stuff. I think they want to.
On your own property.
Well, I think that
On your own property, so I check in to see if you need permits for sign.
it's a state property right there, right, along the road.
Right, but it's still, I think you need, state law does allow signs on the streets and the right of ways.
I don't know, we've been doing that for over a year, so nobody's ever said we can't.
I get complaints on it.
I check into it.
How do I check out, who do I talk to?
Can't give you a permit for it, that's near your own property. I can't permit a sign up there, I don't have the legal right to do so.
This District 6, you can talk to them. It's in their area.
All right, well, who should someone at the library call?
In Durham, District 6.
The Department
Durham?
of Transportation.
Yeah,
DOT.
District 6 is the district that we're in.
Really can help her.
And certainly I can help with that conversation, so you're welcome to put anybody in touch with me and we can have the necessary conversation.
Okay, well, that sounds like a negative thing for the library, so that's kind of like, I'm sorry I got up
No,
and answered that question.
We just wanted, I think it's a good.
You want to follow the law in terms of it.
And then help you folks accomplish your objective.
Okay, good. And what will they say? If they say, no, you can't have a sign there?
Then we have to figure something else out. Or, I'm not gonna anticipate what they're gonna say, that would be kind of off base.
Okay. I'll take that to them.
You'll get it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
John?
On the thing with the solar, if you go to the state's website on energy, they have Barrington listed as exempt from solar, wind, and also from wood, as far as taxation goes. So this taxation thing, if you add $5,000 value and give them a $5,000 decrease, what you're doing is you're increasing the value of $5,000. Right now, there is no value put out, but you still get $5,000 off. That was the incentive to get people to use alternative energy, where they actually got it off, not the value of the equipment they put in, they got it off the value of their house. So this change is actually going to raise their taxes, in all reality. I actually went out a couple of years ago because they have to do reassessing on those exemptions every so many years, and I was asked to go look at the ones that have been out there for a long time, and a lot of them I saw with the old types where they had like a little Trump wall, or they had like a greenhouse thing that gave access into the house, or a simple little water heater up on the wall. Those things all get $5,000 exemptions too, even though they're actually part of the house and they don't come anywhere near that value. So there's going to be an increase. There's no way to say it's not going to be an increase. And the incentive, like I said, that was put out was, we want you to do this, so we're giving you a break and not charging you. You're getting both, so you're going to lose that. That's the reality on that. The other thing I wanted to state was I got an email today. The governor signed the new building code for 2015 that goes into effect September 15th.
The 2015.
2015 code. We've been under the 2009. There's been a lot of pushback over the last few years because of the thermal protection on TJIs, the energy thing, and a few other things. But they compromised and they came together on it and they adopted the code.
Big change for you.
Yeah.
I was attending a lot of training the last few years because they anticipated us getting there, so hopefully I'm up to speed.
Good.
Thank you. All right. Public comment, yes.
Case your brain. 24 Hall Road, Barrington. When I was chair, now that the solar thing got brought up, I'm asking about our energy contract that we had signed with Doug Langdon. I can't remember how long the term was on that. I tried finding it in my emails.
It's been renewed.
And it's,
We renewed it.
oh, okay.
Yep,
So it was 20 months, right?
We're still
Wasn't it
working, the
20?
town is still working with Excess Energy to secure negotiated rates for our energy, and we're currently under contract.
All right, that's all I wanted to check. I just was like, hey, I know I did that, but.
George?
Library doesn't meet any of the special needs accessibility. Doesn't have a door that's greater than a half inch, so there's no room for the restrooms. Getting down the aisle, you don't have the standard space between it, like so.
I think that ADA compliance in the new proposed building.
Oh, that's going to be fantastic.
Has
It
been
will.
an important
It's going to be,
focus.
it's going to be fantastic, but I'll just answer Jay's questions on
Yeah.
the old building.
There was a question that was asked to me and I didn't know the answer, so
Yeah.
I thought this was the perfect time to ask.
Did you answer?
Very good, thank you. Motion to go into non-public
So move.
Second.
for land reputation.
No, personnel,
Personnel.
legal.
I got
Personnel,
reputation.
legal, and
Thank
reputation.
you.
I got personnel.
Personnel, legal, reputation.
There I.
Alien.
Hardikoff, aye.
Do we anticipate coming out?
5-minute break to sign everything?
Mr. Chairman?
Are you coming
Do not
out?
anticipate announcing anything.
No.